Welcome to the Leverage Your Potential podcast. This podcast is hosted by the Director and Assistant Director of Menlo College's Office of Internships, Career Services, and Study Abroad, Dylan Houle and Kelly Davis, in partnership with Menlo's Content Creation Club. Hello and welcome back to the Leverage Your Potential podcast. I am very pleased to be here today with our provost at Menlo College, Grande Lum. I am your host today, Kelly Davis, Assistant Director of Career Services and Study Abroad. And Grande has a really interesting background. He has a JD from Harvard Law School, actually, after majoring in psychology at UC Berkeley, and has spent most of his career in law. He's been an adjunct professor at Stanford a number of times. And as of 2 years ago, he joined the Menlo College community as provost. So really interesting career track. Grande, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks, Kelly, for having me on your show. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. So we're going to jump right in. And Grande, if I can just have you give yourself a little bit of an introduction and what your role here is at Menlo College.
Sure, Kelly. So I am the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Menlo College. So basically, one way to put it is I'm the Chief Academic Officer here. And so I work very closely with all the faculty, with both the full-time professors and the adjunct professors. And I work with them on curriculum issues, on scheduling issues. And again, I work a lot with the academic affairs team, which includes Cindy and Ayana, who many students will interact with. I also focus on what's the future. How do we improve the academics here at Menlo? And focused on both recruiting new faculty and in developing faculty as well. In addition to that, the registrar's office, which people will be familiar with, also reports to me. So we work on how to continually improve that process for students in terms of registering for classes and getting their degree and all of those types of things. The library, which is an integral part of an education here at Menlo in terms of research, in terms of information literacy, work with them on how to improve their services as well. IT, information technology, also reports into me, and certainly right now it matters in terms of
Definitely.
Once we went to entire remote learning and everybody had to learn Zoom very quickly, and everyone had to use Mo in ways that, or Schoology in ways they never had to before. And now some folks are using Respondus, a lockdown browser for testing as well. Also the Alumni Engagement and Development Office work with me, and that's an important part of a sustainability for a college, and we have a great team here at Menlo, and I'm happy to be working with all of them.
Absolutely. And it took me a while to realize that you have probably the most oversight of any of our VPs. You are at the top of so many different employees who are employed by the college, and that's a lot to handle.
It is, but again, there's so many committed staff members here. I really enjoy working with them. Many of them really enjoy and love their work here. I mean, you talk to each of them, they love the variety of work they have here. What I appreciate in having so many different departments reporting is also helping them work with each other better, working with across departments. Just as I mentioned with the IT department with information technology, they're integral to everything we do. And we need to make sure, whether it's Genzabar or Salesforce or Schoology, that it's all working because everybody works together. We're not a big staff, and we have to work together. So that's helped in terms of getting better collaboration across departments too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, thank you for giving us that introduction and kind of giving us the insider's view of what being a provost really means. So now the point of today is we're going to get into what you've focused a lot of your career on, which is conflict resolution. But I want to start a little bit further back, especially for our students who are going to be interested to hear how you ended up deciding what your major was in college and where you went from there. And I want to know a little bit about why you chose to get your bachelor's in psychology. You were at UC Berkeley, and then you moved on to get your Juris Doctor or JD at Harvard. So why did you major in psychology? What prompted you to go on and get your law degree?
My guess is that, like a lot of Menlo students, I didn't know exactly what to major in. When I got to Berkeley, I thought about a number of different things. I actually did think about business. I actually got very close to applying to the undergraduate business program at Berkeley, which is a very good one. And I considered other things as well, economics and English, and a variety of topics. I centered on psychology, I think, because at the time, as a young person, as a freshman in a large university, I was very shy and very introverted, and I thought that I wanted to understand what makes people tick, what made myself tick in a certain way, and I thought psychology would be a good way to do that. And I remember taking a psychology course in high school, and I remember finding it interesting. I remember thinking, like, wow, that talk can change things, that by talking to somebody else, right, more of the clinical or therapeutic aspects of psychology, that might be something I might be interested in doing, perhaps. And just in terms of trying to understand who I was and my own identity at the time, it made sense. I decided not against business. I figured, well, if I really am interested in business, maybe I'll go get an MBA. I thought that might be it at the time. And I started to think about law school, even that might be potentially something I might do in the future. I was fascinated by different types of psychology research that I read about on conformity. There's a psychologist named Ash who, if the group says that one line is longer than the other line, even though that wasn't factually true, peer pressure might lead somebody to say something that was factually untrue. Mm-hmm. I remember looking at the prisoners experiment by Zimbardo at Stanford, and how people act out in certain roles, whether they're a prisoner or a guard. And it just fascinated me about how people can act differently based on the stimuli. So it was good. I actually met my future wife, who's a psychology major.
Oh,
so that turned out that was probably the best thing that happened from being a BA major in psychology. We were in the same psychology research group, and we were looking at the difference between American-born Chinese students and immigrant Chinese students in San Francisco public schools in terms of their assimilation and adaptation. But that's how I met my wife.
Oh, that's so funny. I was just speaking to you before this about my late grandfather, and he and my grandmother went to UC Berkeley and are the forever proponents of the university. And they met in, I think it was a sociology class, and they had taken a trip to St. Quentin's prison or something. So, yeah. Or that was like their first date. So just kind of a funny anecdote.
Yeah, no, it's always no. We the funny thing was, I think when I first met my wife in a psychology research group, she remembers that because I came there after a PE class in basketball, so she wasn't impressed. I would often come in sweaty with a basketball, and I remember is like she wore these, to me, funny looking rainbow socks quite often. That was my initial.
Oh, that's great.
We both got over that.
Nice bit of character there. Well, that's wonderful. And so then what I noticed looking at your LinkedIn profile, there seemed to be a gap between when you graduated with your BAs and then you went to law school. So what happened in between?
Yeah, so actually, this relates to something that's really valuable at Menlo. Is I took an internship for one semester, and I worked at a law firm, Pillsbury Madison Sutro, at the time the largest law firm in San Francisco. So that put me back one semester, which was different. I didn't do it like we typically do it at Menlo in the summer.
Right, in the
and so I had So I graduated in December rather than June. Um, and I applied to law school and got back that I was accepted to Harvard. But I thought, like, wouldn't it be great if I took a little time off and did something in between? So I actually took a job as a reporter for an Asian American newspaper in San Francisco for
That's so
a
cool.
year. And so I did that. I did that. I did an acting workshop, like an all summer acting workshop. Just like, well, I want to, because I didn't travel abroad, which I think is a great
Hmm.
thing to do, and I want to still have some. I was young. I wanted to do some things that were interesting there, and that was a blast. All of that. Yeah, and students often ask that question, right? Should I take some time off or not? I think it varies, but for me, I found it incredibly useful. They were incredibly fun times. I got to, and that, and this will date me, but I graduated in '86 from college, and I covered the people who ran for president in 1988. So folks like Jesse Jackson and Al Gore. So I
Wow.
would cover campaign events, and I would interview politicians. It was a lot of fun, and got to see different worlds in a way that I might not have otherwise. I actually did also get accepted to a master's in counseling psychology at Harvard.
Oh
Sometimes
my.
what I wonder what I would have done if I had done that instead. And sometimes I wish I did it, but I ended up not doing that. So I still ended up making a decision between going to law school and graduate school in psychology.
Yeah, so that could have really put you on a totally different career
Hmm.
trajectory.
Hmm.
That's really interesting. It's like the two dementias
Right.
potentially. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you about how you ended up focusing in more, because
Hmm.
much of your career after you finished your JD was
Hmm.
focused on conflict management and
Right.
resolution. What prompted you to be interested in this? Maybe it had something to do with psychology that you'd learned, maybe not. But how did you end up having so much of a focus there?
Yeah, that's a good point, Kelly. In terms of, even though I ended up not going to graduate school in psychology, it always was a part of my background and my training, and I think what you do as a young person still influences you many years later. A big reason why I ended up focused on conflict management and conflict resolution was because in my first year of law school, I chose a course in negotiation. And at the time, I thought of the class as being one like how to be tough and aggressive and how to get what you want, how to be an advocate in negotiation. That was a reason I went to law school. I went because I was interested in becoming a prosecutor, perhaps a criminal prosecutor, or in civil rights, being a civil rights prosecutor. That were my interests. Those were my interests, and so I thought negotiation would be good to show how tough I was. I took the course was taught by a couple professors. One was Roger Fisher and the other is Bruce Patton. They wrote a book called Getting to Yes. Uh, it was very different from what I imagined. Roger wanted to be called Roger. Most professors I called by their professor so-and-so, especially in law school, and
Hmm.
especially in those days. That would have been the case. And he didn't wear a suit, used flip charts, whiteboards, and was all brainstorming, and it was very much about collaboration and win-win, and it was the diametric opposite of what I thought the class would be about, and it really intrigued me. I enjoyed the class tremendously, and I had a lot of fun with it. But to be honest, that was it. I went on with my law school career. It wasn't until my third year that I came back to it, which is in at Harvard Law School, you had a winter middle term class. So we had what was called winter term. It goes in different names for different schools, but you took one class for the whole 3 weeks. And I was kind of burnt out on law school. And I found out that because I had taken the negotiation class before, I could be a teaching assistant or teaching fellow, and you get paid pretty darn well. Like, wow, I was like, this sounds like a good deal. I'll get paid for it, and I don't have to take a class. I don't have to get a grade. And so I did that, and it was a boot camp. We went Monday through Saturday. Monday through Friday, the class was like from 9 to 5, and Saturday from like 9 to 1. And the teaching fellows had to get there like at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we would to prep. And then after class, we would go for like 6 to 8. They were long,
Wow.
intense days.
Yeah.
But I loved it. It was amazing. And at the time, my professors, Roger Fisher and Bruce Patton, they were involved in South Africa, working with the South African government to end apartheid, and they're working with the African National Congress. This was also the first Iraq War, so they were involved in how to end the war peacefully. It was just I really enjoyed being in the position, which was very different, not being a student and being a teaching fellow, and then running a class. And many of them were older than me. We had like a colonel, we had a minister, we had all these folks, but I was sort of facilitating. I wasn't teaching it per se. I was the facilitator of a working group. And it was just a lot of fun. And one of the professors, another professor named Doug Stone, who wrote a book called Difficult Conversations, observed me and thought that I was really good at it, at running the class, and recommended that I join a company started by these folks called Conflict Management Inc. And that's how and from there I interviewed, and it seemed like a lot of fun, and that's how I joined this firm, and I've been involved in conflict resolution largely ever since then. Ever since 1991, I've traveled the world. I've worked on diplomatic situations. I've done union management negotiations, mergers, all sorts of situations that involve conflict resolution, dispute resolution, and such. And I'll stop there, but I can talk more about other things I've done as well.
Wow, I took a lot away from that. One of them was that it was a class that you took at one point and then you forgot about it, but it came back to you later. And I really resonate with that, and hope that anyone who listens to this takes it away as well, that you might take a class earlier in your college experience and you won't realize until several years later the kind of impact it's had on your thinking. When I was an undergrad, I took a class, it was the sociology of the globalization of higher education or something. I was a European studies major, and I don't have any degree in education, but it's what I ended up being passionate about and kind of changed my career pathway. So that was really interesting. And I think also in the way that it's almost like conflict resolution found you, not the other way around. And it was an opportunity that opened up in front of you, and you took it, and you were enjoying it, and you just let it. And I think before I jump to some of our other questions here, did you at any point have an idea of where you wanted to be in 5 years or 10 years? Was that ever something you considered, or were you a bit more, let's see what happens?
That's a good question. It was definitely a little bit more of, at the beginning for sure, let's see what happens. And you raise a great point about the class that changed your career, right? That you took a sociology of higher education. I mean, I think that's one thing at Menlo College that's a terrific value. I see it for students, that they'll take a class like design thinking from Bruce Payton, and it'll transform what they think they might do with their careers. They'll take an entrepreneurship class, they'll take a psychology class, and it will impact what they think they might do. And that's why I love being in higher ed. That's why I love being at Menlo, because there is that opportunity for students who are looking for guidance, who are looking for something to hang on to, and for something that allows them to move forward here. What else would I add would be that you earlier talked about psychology. A lot of folks, it's interesting. folks who have a psychology background will find conflict resolution really fits them, right? Because it's the idea of facilitation, it's the idea of consensus building, it's the idea of not law as a way of beating down the other side, but using law to get more voices to the table, to empower people, and that. So that's certainly how that became a part of it. And back to your original question about did I envision 5 years? No, when I first started, I said, who knows? I thought maybe I'd leave at some point and become a prosecutor. At the time, to get more, I thought about getting more involved in politics, again, as a method of empowerment, as a method of helping people in terms of what they do. So no, I mean, over time, as I stayed in the career longer, then I thought about different things. I will say in conflict management, you've got to be more entrepreneurial at a certain level, because it's not like being a traditional lawyer where you go and sue people in court, where you work for a law firm, where you go work for the state, work as a public defender. It's one where there aren't as clear opportunities. I think it's similar to the idea if you did an accounting degree. It's clearer, like there are big four accounting firms, there are places where you specifically go once you have that degree that's a passport to a certain profession. If you have a psychology major, even a management major, it might be a little less clear, and you've got to be a little more entrepreneurial. Marketing would be a similar, I think, some similarities. So clearly there are large marketing firms and places that you can go to specifically do marketing.
Yeah, and I could go on about, I'll just touch on this and then I'm going to jump into the next question, but I think that sometimes students get nervous about that flexibility and the uncertainty.
Sure.
That's sometimes where I see the decision occur between an accounting major versus sports management or something of that nature. And I see where the stress comes from, but it's also exciting. So I think it's important that we, even if we do go for something that is a bit more streamlined or a bit more certain, that we keep our options open.
Yeah. One quick point on that, Kelly, is, and even for those who to pick like accounting or finance, which seem more to be like, oh, it has a specific pathway. I'm sure and I certainly know folks who have accounting backgrounds and finance backgrounds who go off to do very different things in their career too. So it's not so, even for people who go down that route, there's still lots of opportunity. Knowing how any business runs, knowing how to do the books will help you no matter what your career, whether you run your own little business, whether you work for a nonprofit, whether you go into administration. Having an accounting background or finance background is tremendously helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So one of the things that I think people like to pick from your resume, you know what I'm about to say here, is that during former President Obama's second term, you served as the director of Community Relations Service in the Department of Justice. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role of Community Relations Service, or CRS, what your role was during that time, and any key learnings that you want to share about that experience?
Sure. And Kelly, you asked earlier about, did you think about your career and where you would be and all that? I never envisioned going to Washington, D.C. and running the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service. That wasn't there. It just turned out that because of circumstances, the opportunity came to. And when asked about what I might be interested in doing, this was the job, though. This was because the Community Relations Service was created by the 1964 Civil Rights Act. President Lyndon Baines Johnson was a big proponent and really the creator of this. And the thought was, how do we help people desegregate? How do we deal with racial issues without litigation? So certainly a similar context. So it's a group of mediators. It's a group of mediators located throughout the country who go and work on issues of civil rights in community matters. And they worked in issues of the March from Selma to Montgomery, where Martin Luther King was involved on a voting rights issue. They were involved in desegregation of schools all over the country that happened in the 70s, in many difficult situations that involved race. In 2009, it also expanded its jurisdiction based on the 2009 Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. So for the first time, the jurisdiction, and what I mean by that is the kind of work that CRS did included race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and disability. So when I got there, we worked on all those issues, and my role was to be the director of it. So I headed an agency. It had 4 regional offices and 15 offices overall, and it went into these situations. So I worked on the situations of, for example, Michael Brown in Ferguson, what happened after Michael Brown was shot, what happened in Baltimore after Freddie Gray was tragically killed, and with Trayvon Martin's situation in Stanford, Florida. But also we worked on a number of other situations, including when the Ku Klux Klan or white nationalist group would protest, and how to deal with that. So you would deal with all sorts of issues, hate crimes of all sorts. So it was, when I came to it, I don't think I realized how big these issues would become for the country. It just so happened that when I got there, all of a sudden they became the biggest issues in the country. So it kept us busy for those 4 years.
That's so interesting, because during that time I was a student in NYU, and I was involved in student activism, and so to think about being on the other side of going, okay, how do we on a national scale try to solve these problems, that seems so difficult, especially coming from knowing where a lot of our brains were at.
Yeah, and it's a challenging role, because what is the job is to try to resolve the issues. The job is it is to make sure that protests are safe and people don't get harmed and people don't get killed by it. But it's also to allow for the arc of social justice, the fact that if we're created by a civil rights act, it's because that's the goal, to change society to a better place. So it has these mutual goals of maintaining safety and of helping society move towards greater social justice.
Definitely. I think you phrased that beautifully. I'm going to steal that when I'm talking to people.
Great.
Well, thanks for going into that a little bit. So now on the teaching end, you last semester taught a 1-credit course on negotiation at Menlo, and I was part of that. That was it was really enjoyable, first of all, not just saying that.
I'm glad. No, Kelly, it was great to have you in the class.
But it's also interesting because you talked about how you had gone to law school for some of the more, I would use the term aggressive litigation.
Right.
And one of the things I struggled with in that class were the case studies where it was about money, and people came to it with that mindset. But I had a background of more thinking about things like lateral leadership and making sure everybody's voices were heard at the table, transparency and honesty. So I would come up to these situations and go, I don't know how to handle this. But your class, I think, really got at the core of what we need to do in terms of collaboration and some of that conflict resolution. So it was really great. So we also read in that class G. Richard Schell's book, Bargaining for Advantage. And he indicates that culture has a part to play in our personal negotiation styles even. And so speaking to my example just now, he uses gender and talks about international conflicts. So how has culture surfaced as an element of your conflict resolution work?
That's a great question. And Kelly, I really appreciated how you framed your question in terms of, you come from a lateral leadership, how to be inclusive, and it seems opposite of that us versus them, you win, I lose, or sort of approach negotiation. And I think the benefit of a class is how to bring those together. Like, how do I come to a negotiation when there is a fixed pie or a zero-sum game, but I want to be transparent, I want to be collaborative, I want to be selfless. And because if I'm in that type of situation, I don't want to be taken advantage of either, right? Nobody wants to no one wants to lose and feel like, oh, I should have been a jerk, or I should have been more aggressive, because that would serve me better here. And so Richard Shell's book, I think the title is great, right? Bargaining for Advantage, Negotiation Strategies for Reasonable People. You don't want to be a jerk, but you don't want to be taken advantage of. And I think that's an important piece. And culture totally plays into that, right? How we negotiate depends on the culture in which you were raised, right? What you see as appropriate. For some people, like, oh no, your job is to beat up on all the suckers out there, maybe, right? Or yours is like, no, we share everything, right? What family matters, or community matters, and serving others matter. And so I was attracted to negotiation because I think culture is present at all times,
Yes.
whether it's invisible or not. When two people interact with each other, they will likely come from different backgrounds and maybe very different backgrounds. So whether it's a gender difference or whether it's a nationality difference, that plays into having to even sort of negotiate over the rules that you're negotiating, right? Of that, or how to come to a common approach or a common perspective on what the goal is for that negotiation, or for how we will approach it in a fair manner.
Definitely. I loved everything you just said there. I think I know what the answer is to this one, reflecting back on your class, but do you have any advice for anyone who's seeking to improve those conflict resolution skills, or what might be the most important facets of negotiation that we should be focusing on?
Yeah, so you took the course. I think taking a course is a terrific thing to do. I should also mention that I've written a book on negotiation, so I'd certainly recommend
Yes,
that.
I'll link to it in the notes.
I'd recommend that as well. So both of those things I think are important to improving your conflict resolution. And while you're at Menlo, or while you're in grad school, or if you're working for a large company or large organization that offers training, or you can go to lynda.com or to LinkedIn to get training. Those are all fabulous ways, right? It's the idea of how you approach things as a lifelong learner. Many of the people listening to this are in school right now, but you'll someday finish school, and do you continue learning, right? Versus, do you see yourself as, oh, I've learned everything I need to know and that's it. What I said earlier about, hey, what I love about Menlo is you can take a course and it will change your life. For me, yeah, I think I'm an example. I took one course in school and it's changed my entire career trajectory, but it's also made me, I think, similar to you, Kelly, like, I view myself as a nice person, and I don't view myself as a sort of a negotiator that tries to take advantage of people. But over time, I've been very comfortable in dealing with whatever type of person that comes before me, whether they're aggressive or whether they're hiding something or whether they're trying to intimidate me. But that doesn't mean I need to reflect it back at them. Right? I try to change the game. I try to create a playing field that will both be comfortable in, or helping people become more comfortable in as well.
Yeah, and I think that parts, quality is that maybe we can at least practice if we don't feel that they come natural to us, our patience in those types of contexts. But what I think you're also saying there is, over time you have become more comfortable, and in your class you said practice. So I think that's one of
I'm
the
glad you
keys
remembered
as well.
that, Kelly.
Yes.
It's true. We have lots of opportunities to practice, right? Negotiation's easy because every day we're going to be trying to persuade someone to do someone, and someone's trying to persuade us to do it. So we have lots of opportunities for example, for negotiation or conflict management, because we're faced with conflict at work. We're faced with conflict with our roommates, with our fellow students, with our faculty, whoever it is. So there are always opportunities to get better.
Definitely. And speaking of opportunities, I know that there's a bit of a discussion underway, or there was a couple months ago, for incorporating a conflict resolution initiative of some sort at Menlo College. What are you envisioning might be part of this initiative? Is it going anywhere at the moment? What can we expect for the future?
So there are several great students who are doing a conflict resolution IDR with me this semester. Some of them were your classmates in last semester, and they're working on a survey right now, actually on conflict resolution. They'll be sending that out likely next week to the entire community. So that'll help sort of give an assessment of what might be helpful. And they're also looking at uh, adding some web pages on conflict resolution to the Menlo College website and running workshops for maybe for freshman students or transfer students or students in the dorms as a way of improving their conflict resolution as well. The other thing that we are at least communicating about is there a space for some sort of ombud or peer mediators, just like you may have, Kelly, you may know, and I'm sure some of our listeners will have been maybe peer mediators or playground mediators in high school or in elementary school. Maybe we could use something like that at Menlo to help students in resolving their conflicts or giving them a little coaching to help them deal with that. We certainly hear situations where roommates don't talk to each other, or
Right.
or things like that, or students in group projects not getting along with each other because they feel like one of them is taking on more responsibility than the others are, especially, and that makes sense. If they haven't done that in high school, they're doing something new here, and so they may need more to improve in that. So yeah, I'm excited. I have a great bunch of students this semester, and they're helping figure out for this semester and for the years to come.
Oh, great. Well, I'm really looking forward to that, and I think that anyone listening should be keeping an eye out for those bits as well. And so I am going to jump back to one question that I skipped over earlier, just for sake of the flow. I'm really curious to know how you became the provost here at Menlo.
So after I left CRS, I helped start the Divided Community Project initiative at Ohio State, but I never actually lived in Columbus, Ohio. I moved back from the Washington, D.C. area to the San Francisco Bay Area, back home here, and I was asked to help create this new project that would complement CRS in terms of being focused on prevention and in terms of what was going on in the country. There was a lot of polarization, a lot of division. There was a new president, and that was certainly creating some additional conflict as well. And really happy to do that. I'd been thinking about going to work at a undergraduate college. I wanted to consider that, so I looked around, and I had the chance to talk to the president of Menlo College, Stephen Weiner, and I didn't know anybody. I actually did not know anybody at Menlo College at the time. One person who'd become a board member, Ben Wagner, was on it, and I knew him from working at the Department of Justice at Menlo College, and he said that he thought Menlo College was a great place to work, and certainly encouraged me as well. And President Weiner, Stephen, asked me to consider throwing my ring, my hat in the ring, as it were,
Yeah.
for provost. And from there, I got a chance to meet everybody, meet the faculty. Really loved what Menlo College is doing in terms of really for the type of students Menlo brings in, and the type of guidance and the type of support that you bring to them, that the whole team brings to students. I just thought it was a wonderful community, and thought that this would be the perfect place for me to come to.
Well,
And it's been true.
yes, we're glad to have you. Absolutely. I mean, I came just a couple months after you did, but I'm happy we're both there here. So
Agreed.
thank you for sharing that. And now I'm going to jump to our last question that we're starting to ask all of our interviewees. And it's in the spirit of lifelong learning, just as you mentioned a few minutes ago. And I would like to know, what are you reading right now? What podcasts might you be listening to? What documentaries or films are you watching? What is kind of your lifelong learning project right now, or just something you're doing for fun?
I'd actually like to do a podcast on those things. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Talk about the podcasts and books and documentaries. That sounds like a lot of fun.
It would be fun.
There's a podcast called The Rewatchables by Bill Simmons, where he talks about films, talks about films that are rewatchable. That's terrific. So that wasn't the one I was going to recommend, but I do that. First, I'll start with reading. I've just finished reading, and actually, I think the audiobook is even better. It's Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. A great, one of the, I think, most persuasive sort of authors taking research and making it more accessible for the mainstream. And this is a book about, and it's very related to conflict resolution, negotiation, the challenges we face when we communicate with strangers, people we don't know, that we're often really not very good at figuring out when other people are lying or not. That we really don't have a sense of how to figure out who is trustworthy or not. It's really changed my perspective. I mean, it's in terms of how to think about communication with people. It starts with the Sandra Bland case in where she is pulled over by a police officer and how to rethink it. It talks about the situation at Ohio State with the coach who was accused of child molestation, Jerry Sandusky. It talks about cases that we all know about, makes you think differently about it. So I would highly recommend it. It uses podcast techniques, even in the audio version of the book. It uses the actual voices of the people involved. It uses news stories from that time. I think it'd be terrific for our students in how they think about how to interact with people, how to collaborate with folks. So I'd highly recommend that. In terms of podcasts, I listen to a lot of political podcasts, but I'll go with 99% Invisible by Roman Mars, which is produced out in Oakland, California. It's about design. Why does something end up the way it is? Like, why is it that we have casual dress is actually connected to aloha shirts in Hawaii? It looks at why Las Vegas is a great example of American architecture, and we need to pay attention to Las Vegas. It just does some amazing things that, when you say 99% invisible, we see the 1%. We see what the design is, but what leads to that design? What's all the things that go behind it to make it? So I find it a fabulous podcast for that reason. In terms of documentaries, I do love good documentaries. I'm planning on watching the one on Fred Rogers. I just watched I'm connecting it with the film, the Tom Hanks film, which I thought was really good about Mr. Rogers. It was better than I thought it would be, because I thought it would be a typical sort of biopic, but it really conveys the importance of positivity and how, in the face of pain and hurt, of what Mr. Rogers really conveyed in changing how we view how television can really make a difference in how kids grow up and how we treat each other with kindness. So I'll stop there.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for all those recommendations. I'm looking for my next audiobook. So Talking to Strangers is going to be the one for sure.
Yep.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're just about at time. So this was a really great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Kelly, this is a lot of fun.
Great.
I'd love to come on it again.
Absolutely. Well, we can always come up with more topics. So I'm going to go ahead and sign us off here. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leverage Your Potential podcast. Episodes are posted weekly and can be found on our blog at blog.menlo.edu/career-services/. Make it a great day.